Hello Art One. Once again, I am here showing you some more videos of how to start with your coloring step on your visual pun. As you can see, I have finished, well, not completely finished, but mostly finished my leaf and my stem. The next thing I'm going to be working on are the pincers that go around the crabapple, and then the last thing I'm going to be doing is the crab. Or the apple. So I'm not going to show you necessarily every single step of every single pincer because that would be a lot of time. But what I am going to do is work on one of the larger pincers and film that so that you can see sort of the color buildup and layering process for something like that. Now, one thing I do want to bring your attention to is on the leaf and the stem area, I have obviously used a lot of different colors, shading, overlapping, used some white, used some darker values. But then what I've also done is I've gone in and erased sort of my pencil line that goes around everything. Because the last thing that we want to do is leave a big dark gray pencil outline around something that we've worked really hard to shade and make it look three-dimensional. Because when we look at things in the real world, they don't have gray outlines around them. So sometimes you're going to have a white space, like on the edge of some of these leaves, that fades directly into the background, and that's perfectly fine. It's a really hard thing to get used to because we like to be able to see the edge of things, but there are going to be times during this project and other shading projects where you're not going to have an edge, per se, around one of your forms because it looks flattening when you have too much of a severe outline around those areas. So now I'm going to go ahead and just work on, I think I'll start on this pincer. So I'll scooch it over a little bit, make it easier to see. And looking at this pincer, remember I've got my computer in front of me so that I can see what colors are in it. There's definitely a lot of orange. There's a little bit of red. There's definitely going to be some yellow and some brown. There's going to be some white, and then maybe even some purple and some black in sort of the corner pointy, well, black areas, for lack of a better word. Because if you look at my video, you can see on the very edges of my reference image, those pincers have sort of a black space on them. So I do want to make sure that I'm using a little bit of black there. Otherwise, we will not really use much black on these visual puns at all. Maybe a wee tiny little bit in some of the deepest dark values at the very end, but no black unless what you are drawing is black otherwise. So, and once again, I'm going to start with some of my darker areas. I'm not going to start with the black area, but what I am going to do is start in some of the shadow areas on other portions of the pincer. I'm going to start with the brown because that's going to help push that back a little bit because it is a neutral and it's a bit of a darker value than like the oranges and the yellows that I'll be using. And once again, your grid lines should have been drawn much, much later than mine. So they will not even show up, not even interfere as much with your shading as what you're seeing in mine. You can probably see some of the grid lines. On yours, we should not be able to see them. So that will be good. So right now, I'm just, same as I did on the leaf, I'm going in. I'm looking for the different areas where I have those darker values. But this time I am going to have some pretty distinct line type of areas simply because the crab's pincers are kind of metallic and there are different sort of overlapping knuckles almost. So I want to make sure that I get some of those in there. Now the pincer also has a slightly different texture than the leaf or the rest of the apple. So it's okay to get some of that texture in there too. If you're shading something that looks a little bit rough, then your shading might not be quite as smooth to kind of match the texture of what you're shading. If what you're looking at and drawing is very smooth, kind of glassy, then you're going to want to work really hard to make your shading as smooth as possible so that it sort of mimics the smoothness of that glass. Or that glassy surface, I should say. So remember, I'm looking really more at my computer than I am at what I'm shading. I'm looking at what I'm shading enough to know that I'm in the right spot. But then to figure out what values to put and where, I am looking largely just at the actual reference image. Remember, there's going to be reflected light in some of these areas, just like there was with the sphere, and just like I'll have on my apple. You always want to look for that reflected light. So I know right now we're not in the most exciting steps. It's just sort of an underpainting almost. But notice that like here, for instance, I'm making sure that it smoothly transitions on both sides into that white space, not just a line there. It's a transition where the darkest part of this section is in the middle, but then as I go out, it gets lighter, but it does so gradually. Not just all of a sudden, there's a light value. So then down here, I am going to go ahead and put in just a little bit of black. Because remember, this part of my pincer is quite literally black. But I'm still going to make sure it transitions. So at this point, it's probably going to look more like there's a little bit of black on it, but it's mostly gray. Because this is still just my first layer. It will probably get blacker as I move along. But right now, I'm just going to kind of leave it as a grayish area. And I'll go back to it as needed. So once again, I'm not anywhere near done yet with even just this first layer. So just a reminder, it's going to take you some time, especially at first, as you are starting to just get used to and learn how to do all these processes. Give yourself time. Be patient with yourself. This is why Black Day students are going to be starting on this on Monday. That way I can be around to help you guys. And Gold Day students, I do not want you to start on this until Wednesday. So both groups of students, you must make sure that all of your drawing steps are done by the time you come to class. But do not start adding color until we get a chance to talk through it together so that I can actually be with you and help you as needed so that we get the color portion started off correctly. So now I'm just going in with a little bit of orange. My next step would be to use a little bit of yellow. And then I would go back and do brown again, orange again, yellow again, white maybe, over and over and over again until eventually I get things to the right values and the right colors and combinations thereof in the right places so that that pincer starts to look three-dimensional. And then I would move on to the next one. Because remember, we do not want to finish any of them on their own. So I'm just going to keep moving along here until my time runs out. My time limit, I should say. So remember to turn the page however often you need, whatever angles you need. It is absolutely okay if it's easier for you to shade something upside down. Just because it's upside down does not mean that it's wrong, does not mean that it's going to stay upside down. So if you find that that's helpful, turn the page. Do that. That's absolutely fine. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to get my head in there and block you. I'm going to go in with a little bit of yellow in some of these areas now. Not a whole lot of yellow yet, because just like with the light green on the leaf, yellow is sort of a light color. So I'm going to use it towards the end a little bit more, similarly to how we would be using white, to just kind of bring everything together and do the last minute sort of color combinations there. But there are some areas where yellow is more prominent, and we do want to make sure that we get the yellow in there, in those spaces. So now I'm going to go back in with some more brown. Remember, you can have as many layers as you need. You can have as many colored pencils out as you need. And now, similarly to when we were doing the drawing step, I'm just going back through all my shading, adding more detail, correcting anything that needs to be corrected. Like if I find that I've just left brown out completely in any certain area, then I would be going back into that area to put the brown. And I'm also going back into my orange areas and my yellow areas and overlapping them with brown so that they start to look a little more accurate in terms of color and value. And so that shading smooths out. Because the first couple layers of shading are not going to be smooth. They're just not. And then the more layers you build up, the smoother that shading will get. So remember, if you have white, like how there's some white along this highlight or white anywhere else within your piece, you want to leave the paper showing, especially at the beginning. And then you can add white as you go and continue building up the values that you see. Now right here, there's actually a shadow that is a shape. There's no value transition, it's just a shadow. So I'm just going to very carefully look at the shape of that shadow. And I'm going to draw that in there. And just leave that shape there. I'm also going to go ahead and go into some of these darker areas with some purple. I know it sounds odd, but if you look really closely, you'll see the purple is frequently in the shadows. Because in nature, there's not actually much black. So usually what we see as black is actually a dark, dark, dark purple or a very dark blue. Not always, of course, but a lot of times. So you'll see a lot of times in landscapes and in portraits and other types of paintings, the artists will not use much black, even though it might appear that they are, but it is in reality just a very dark shade of purple or blue to create that dark shadow area. So we're going to be doing the same. Go over this whole shadow that I said was just a shape here to make that more the right value, because it is a bit darker than some of the other areas around it. So one thing that you do want to be aware of while you are working, especially in shadows, is that you make sure that not all shadows are the exact same color or value, because that will also flatten those shadows a lot more than you want. So the next video I'm going to show you is just going to be more work on the pincer. I'm not going to talk during the next video. It's just going to be a demonstration of some of those shading steps.